My name is Evelyn Greene. I'm 67 years old, a retired literature teacher, and a widow living in a small town just outside Boston, Massachusetts. For most of the past 6 years, I've lived alone in the house my late husband, Michael, and I bought when we were first married. After he passed, I found comfort in routine. I drank my tea the same way every morning, sat by the same window with the same book, and kept my calendar filled with community book club meetings and Sunday walks. People often asked if I was lonely, and I'd smile and say I was fine. But the truth is, the silence had begun to stretch longer than it used to, and it wasn't as gentle anymore. Winter came harder that year, and my knees didn't like the stairs as much as they once did. That was when Jason, my only son, and his wife Claire called to offer something I hadn't expected. They said I could come live with them for a while, at least until things felt easier. Claire said they had plenty of space, that I'd have my own room and my privacy, and that it would mean so much for their kids to have me around more often. I hesitated. I've always been someone who tries not to impose. But there was something in Jason's voice I hadn't heard in a while. Maybe concern, maybe love. And so, after a few more cold nights and one particularly rough morning where I slipped carrying groceries, I said yes. I packed carefully, not too much. Just the essentials and a few sentimental things I couldn't bear to leave behind. As I closed the front door to the house that had been my shelter for decades, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. This isn't giving up. It's just the next chapter. I didn't know then what that chapter would hold, but I believed, for a brief moment, that I was stepping into something kinder. Jason and Claire's house looked like it came straight out of a magazine. The kind with glossy pages and perfect lighting, where everything has a place but no real story. It was big, clean, and white, with smooth countertops and floors that didn't squeak no matter how quietly you walked. They greeted me at the door with smiles, both of them speaking at once about how excited they were and how good this would be for everyone. Claire took my bag before I could even protest, saying she already prepared my room, and that dinner was in the oven. I remember nodding and thanking her, even though my hands were still on my coat, still holding on to the last moment of outside. My room was on the first floor, near the laundry room. It had fresh sheets, a small desk, and one framed photo of a leafless tree in winter. Claire said she chose that one because it felt peaceful. I said it was lovely, though it made me feel a little cold. Over the next few days, I noticed how things worked around their house. Claire liked things neat, in very specific ways. She had labels on the pantry shelves, and the towels had to be folded in thirds, not halves. I once moved a coffee mug from one cabinet to another, and by the end of the afternoon, it had quietly made its way back to the original spot. It wasn't that she was unkind. She smiled when she saw me cooking, and often thanked me for watching the kids after school. But there was a tone in her voice that lingered just a little too long on certain words, like helpful or considerate. As if reminding me what roles I was meant to play here. I stayed out of the way as much as I could. I wiped down counters that were already clean and kept my tea mugs washed before anyone noticed I'd used them. I tried to earn the space I took up, even though they'd told me I didn't have to. The house was always quiet, except for the occasional hum from the dishwasher or the buzz of Claire's phone as she moved through the rooms. Jason was gone most of the day with work, and the kids were either at school or busy with activities. Sometimes, I'd find myself sitting by the window with my book in hand, only realizing after a long stretch that I hadn't turned a single page. There were no raised voices, no messes left behind, no music playing from another room, just order. Predictable and efficient. But somehow, the stillness felt less like peace and more like a pause that never unpaused. One afternoon, I was folding laundry, and noticed Claire had refolded the towels I did the day before. She didn't say anything. I didn't ask. But I held onto one towel a moment longer, wondering if it had to be perfect to be accepted here. I think what unsettled me most wasn't the house itself. It was the feeling that I was being gently nudged into the shape of someone they could manage. I hadn't come here expecting to be in control, but I hadn't expected to feel like a guest, either. By the end of the first week, I had my routine down. Pick up the kids, prep dinner, stay small. Claire complimented how tidy the kitchen was and thanked me again for being so thoughtful. I smiled back and said it was no trouble. It wasn't. But it also didn't feel like home. Claire knocked on my door early that Saturday morning, dressed in a linen jumpsuit and holding her phone like it was an extra limb. Jason was already outside loading their suitcases into the SUV. She smiled at me, polished and polite, and said they were heading to Hawaii for the week. Just the two of them. A couple's trip to unwind. She handed me a bottle of red wine and said it was for my quiet evenings. Her voice had that soft tone people use when they're giving you something they think you should be grateful for. I nodded, told her to have a wonderful time, and she smiled again before disappearing down the hallway. From the porch, I watched their car pull away. The kids waved sleepily from the back seat, and Claire mouthed something I couldn't quite catch before turning her attention back to her phone. The sun was just rising, casting a pale gold across the lawn. When their car finally disappeared around the corner, I stood there a little longer than I needed to. The house was still. Not the gentle stillness of early mornings, but something sharper, like a stage after the curtain falls. I walked back inside and placed the bottle on the kitchen counter. There was a note taped to it in Claire's neat handwriting. For your quiet evenings, thank you for everything, Evelyn. It should have felt kind. But instead it felt rehearsed, like someone following the end of a script. The fridge was full, every item arranged by type and size, containers labeled with the day they should be used. Even the herbs were wrapped in damp paper towels, tucked into glass jars like tiny bouquets. I poured myself some tea and sat by the kitchen window, but something about the way the light hit the counters made the whole room look like a model home, not a lived-in space. At first, the silence felt like a relief. No kids running through the hallway. No Claire politely correcting the way I stacked the mugs. Just me and the hum of the refrigerator. But after a while, I realized the house didn't feel empty. It felt expectant, like it was waiting for something to happen. I walked into the living room, ran my fingers along the edge of the coffee table, and noticed how not a single item was out of place. The bookshelf was organized by color, not genre. The diffuser let out a soft puff of eucalyptus every 10 minutes. I picked up one of the books. It cracked at the spine. No one had read it. Later that afternoon, I stepped into the guest bathroom and the lights clicked on automatically. The mirror sparkled. I looked at myself for a while, longer than I usually did. I looked fine. The same short gray hair, the same tired eyes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something in the reflection didn't quite belong to me anymore. That night, I turned off the lights and climbed into bed. It was quiet, completely quiet. I stared up at the ceiling and saw a small red light blinking slowly. My first thought was that it was a smoke detector, the kind you see in every hotel room. But something about the way it blinked, the timing of it, made my skin feel tight. It didn't look like a sensor. It looked like a signal. I lay there, arms folded, telling myself not to overthink. Claire liked her smart gadgets. The thermostat adjusted automatically when I walked by. The music system knew her favorite playlists. Maybe this was just another one of her upgrades. But something deep in my stomach twisted in a way I hadn't felt since I was young and caught someone reading my diary. A quiet intrusion that left no trace but still unsettled everything. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easy. Somewhere in the silence, something had shifted. The peace I thought I'd find in this house didn't feel like peace at all. It felt like a performance I hadn't agreed to be part of. And now, without anyone else around, the spotlight was on me. That night, I lay on the edge of sleep, curled under the quilt Claire had folded at the foot of the bed. The silence was thick, almost too perfect, like a movie scene paused just before something happens. My eyes drifted toward the ceiling, and that's when I saw it again. The red light, blinking. Slow, steady, not frantic like a fire alarm, but calm, almost patient. At first I dismissed it. Smoke detector, I told myself. Everyone has one. Claire loved her safety protocols, and this was probably just another one of her standard installations. But something about it bothered me. The light didn't blink the way I remembered alarms blinking. It pulsed. It felt deliberate. I closed my eyes for a moment, willing myself to sleep. But the moment I did, I saw again in my mind how Alexa had flickered on earlier that day when I mumbled to myself in the kitchen. I hadn't said her name. I hadn't said anything loud. Just a soft comment about the weather, as I rinsed out a teacup. The blue ring lit up anyway, listening. Then I thought about the hallway lights. They came on too fast, even when I tiptoed past. Not a gentle fade, but a snap. Every step seemed to activate something. I remembered standing in the laundry room and hearing a quiet click, like a switch being thrown somewhere out of sight. It had made me stop in my tracks, though I didn't know why. The house had been too aware. That was the word. Not welcoming, not secure, aware. Like it had its own attention span, and I was the thing being noticed. Back in bed, I watched that red light for what felt like hours. The more I stared at it, the more it seemed wrong. A smoke detector doesn't blink all night. It doesn't glow like it's waiting for you to move. I told myself to stop. I told myself I was being dramatic. But I've spent decades around classrooms, libraries, and hallways with hidden cameras and quiet observation. I know what surveillance feels like, even when it's dressed up as safety. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket tighter. But I didn't sleep. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, like the light above me. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. Like I had seen something before I knew what it was, and now that I knew, I couldn't unsee it. The next morning, I waited until the sun was fully up before I started checking. I moved slowly, like I was walking through someone else's house, even though it was supposed to be mine too. My steps were soft on the hardwood floor, but inside, every nerve felt pulled tight. I started in the living room. At first glance, everything looked exactly as it should. Then I leaned closer to the diffuser on the shelf, the one that quietly puffed eucalyptus into the air every hour. Near the back, behind a vented panel, I saw it. A tiny dark circle, barely bigger than a pencil eraser. My stomach sank. I turned toward the bookshelf, running my fingers along the row of art books Claire had arranged by color. None of them had creased spines. I picked one up, pretending to admire the cover, and saw something behind it. A small black disc, tucked between two decorative frames. I didn't touch it, I just stared. In the dining room, I looked up at the modern chandelier hanging above the table. Inside one of the frosted glass bulbs, there was a glint. A hard glint, not the soft glow of light, something with edges. I stepped back slowly, my hand tightening around the back of a chair. The hallway was next. I passed the thermostat, and as I did, I noticed a single black dot in the center of the screen. I'd seen enough smart thermostats to know that dot wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't need to get closer. I already knew. By the time I reached the laundry room, I felt hollow. I opened the cabinet above the washer and stared at the plastic casing inside. Another lens. This one positioned just right to capture everything in the room. Everything I had done there. I stood in the middle of the hallway and listened. The house made no noise, but it didn't feel quiet. It felt like something was breathing through the walls, watching without blinking. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but something inside me broke in half, not from fear, from understanding. They hadn't just made space for me, they'd turned me into something to monitor. Claire's office was always locked. She said it was for privacy, that her freelance work involved sensitive material. I never questioned it. I respected closed doors. But that morning, as I passed by with a basket of laundry, I noticed the door was slightly ajar, not wide open, just enough to catch my eye. I paused in the hallway, listening. No sounds, no movement. My hand hovered near the knob, heart tapping a slow warning in my chest. Then I pushed gently. The door opened with a soft click. The first thing I noticed was how different the room felt from the rest of the house. It wasn't polished, it wasn't curated. Wires trailed across the carpet like vines. A folding table sagged under the weight of a laptop, a second monitor, 2 external hard drives, and a small black console with blinking lights. The walls were bare except for a corkboard covered in sticky notes and clipped receipts. I stepped inside, not out of boldness, but because something had shifted in me. I needed answers now, not assumptions. I moved toward the desk slowly. The computer was on, no password prompt. Just the desktop screen with 2 folders sitting side by side, one labeled logs, the other, footage. I didn't open them. Not yet. I just stood there, staring at those words like they were holding something fragile and dangerous all at once. The lights on the console blinked in steady rhythm, green and amber. A quiet hum filled the room, low and constant. A notebook lay beside the keyboard, filled with dates and short phrases in Claire's tidy handwriting. Nothing dramatic. Just words like kitchen AM, guest room, unusual behavior. I placed a finger on one of the hard drives, feeling the warmth beneath the casing. It had been running recently. In the corner of the room, a large file box overflowed with cables, chargers, and unopened device manuals. I recognized the logo from the thermostat, the same one on the diffuser. They weren't just smart devices, they were part of a system. I backed up one step, steadying my breath. This wasn't a workroom, it was a control center. And the more I looked, the more I realized I hadn't just been living in their house. I'd been part of something they were actively managing. Something that had nothing to do with safety or care. I sat down in Claire's desk chair and moved the mouse. The screen woke instantly. No password, just those 2 folders staring back at me. I clicked on the one labeled footage. Inside, rows of video files filled the window. Each one was named by room and date. Kitchen, 2024, 5. 3. Guest room, 2024, 5. 4. Laundry, 2024, 5. 5. I clicked on a clip. It opened in silence. There I was, sitting in the living room, a book in my lap. I watched myself sip tea, rub my shoulder, adjust the blanket draped over my legs. My movements were small, ordinary, the kind of things no one should ever feel the need to explain. I clicked another. It was from the kitchen. I was in my robe, humming a tune as I rinsed a coffee mug. The camera had captured everything. Every pause. Every breath. I opened another folder. It was called Clips, Suicide. My hand stopped on the mouse. The videos inside were short, 10-15 seconds. Labeled with words like crying, talking to self, unusual behavior. One showed me sitting alone in the guest room, staring at a photograph in my lap. Another captured me whispering to myself about missing Michael. None of it was dangerous, none of it was strange, but all of it felt stolen. Then I saw the file named Claire, April Call. I hesitated. Then I clicked. The screen filled with her face, laughing into the camera, a wine glass in hand. She was talking to someone I didn't recognize, her voice light and careless. She said she still doesn't know she's being recorded. It's honestly kind of fascinating. She narrates everything like she's in a book or a movie. The other person laughed. Claire kept going. I think we could turn it into something. A short doc, maybe. The Forgotten Matriarch. It basically writes itself. My throat tightened, but no sound came out. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, listening to her voice wrap around words that used to feel safe to me. Narrates everything. Forgotten Matriarch. I wasn't a person in those moments. I was a project, a concept. I leaned back in the chair, barely breathing. Every second of footage, every whispered moment, had been packaged and categorized like it belonged to someone else. But it didn't. It belonged to me. And now I knew, without doubt, that this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a decision, cold, calculated, and dressed in the language of concern. I didn't slam the laptop shut. I didn't delete a thing. I let it all sit there, exactly as it was, because I needed it untouched. I walked out of the room slowly, not out of fear but out of instinct. The same instinct I used when Jason was a toddler, and I had to move through the house quietly so he wouldn't wake. I didn't close the door behind me. I just let it rest on the latch. That evening, after the sun had dipped low behind the trees, I went back into the office with a flash drive I had tucked away in the bottom of my suitcase. It was an old one, from when I used to save lesson plans and baby photos. It still worked. I plugged it in and began copying the footage folders, one by one, into its small blinking memory. It moved slowly. I didn't rush it. While the files transferred, I opened Claire's desk drawer. Inside were receipts, printed manuals, a few sticky notes. I pulled out a slim folder with the word security typed across the top. There were contracts inside, installation dates, signed approvals. Every room accounted for, including mine. Claire's signature was in blue ink, the same ink she used to label the fridge shelves. I took what I needed. Not everything, just enough to build a picture that couldn't be argued with. Then I found 3 still images from the footage and printed them with the small wireless printer near the desk. One of me reading on the couch, one of me chopping vegetables, one of me staring out the window. They were quiet moments, human moments. The kind no one has the right to own but me. I placed them in an envelope along with a letter I wrote by hand. Nothing dramatic, just the facts. This is what I know. This is what I saw. This is how I was made into something small and silent. Then I sealed the envelope and mailed it to myself at my own new forwarding address. It would be postmarked, dated, documented. That night, I didn't cry. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table with the lights off. I listened to the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking of the thermostat. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vengeful. What I felt was steadiness, like something inside me had locked into place. I wasn't planning revenge. I was reclaiming what was already mine, my time, my space, myself. I waited until the house was dark, not just quiet, but still. The kind of stillness that presses against your skin and waits to be broken. I sat in the armchair by the window, facing the camera I hadn't touched. The one blinking slowly from the corner of the ceiling. I knew it was on. That was the point. I didn't rehearse. I didn't write anything down. I just looked into that little glass eye and let the silence stretch until it became full. Then I spoke. You never asked me. You never told me. But I know now. I know what you've done. I know what you've seen. And I know what you thought I wouldn't notice. You built a house around me like a set piece. Not a home, but a stage. You smiled and said I belonged here. But what you meant was I was convenient, quiet, easy to erase. I've lived enough years to understand what it means when someone offers you comfort while watching your every move. That isn't love. That isn't care. It's control dressed as concern. I won't yell. I won't accuse. But I will say this. I was never yours to study. I was never yours to monitor. I am not material for your project. I am not an object in your narrative. I am not forgotten. I'm done shrinking. I'm done whispering. I'm done being compliant just to keep a seat at your table. You don't get to decide what I'm worth anymore. I let the silence settle again. Not the kind that waits to be filled, the kind that finishes something. Then I stood, walked out of frame, and turned off the light. I didn't need to say anything else. The rest had already been said. They came home on a Thursday evening just after the sun dipped below the trees. I was outside, watering the roses along the fence. I didn't rush inside. I didn't wave. I simply sipped my tea and watched their car pull into the driveway. Claire's laugh rang out first, that bright, intentional kind of sound that always felt like it was made for an audience. Jason followed her, dragging their matching luggage up the walkway. They didn't see me right away. I imagined what they saw instead: the kitchen lights already on, 3 photos laid out on the counter, a folded letter resting beside them, the air heavy with something they didn't expect. I didn't need to be in the room to know how it landed. Silence always speaks louder when it isn't supposed to be there. Jason stepped outside first. He spotted me near the hydrangeas and walked over slowly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He stopped a few feet away, shifting his weight like he did when he was a teenager trying to come clean about something without saying the words. He asked if we could talk. I nodded toward the chair across from me. He sat, shoulders tight, voice low. He said he knew what I saw, that it wasn't what it looked like. He said the cameras were installed for safety, that a neighbor's house had been broken into a few months ago, and they forgot to turn the system off. It wasn't personal. I was family. I let him speak. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I waited a moment before answering. Would you feel trusted if someone recorded your private moments for months without telling you? He didn't respond. Not right away. He just looked down at his shoes. Claire came out then. Her arms were crossed. Her mouth tight. She didn't sit. She said she was hurt. Hurt that I went through her things. Hurt that I sent files to a lawyer. Her words were sharp, clipped, and full of restraint. I looked up at her, calm and steady. If being discovered hurts you, perhaps ask why it was something you needed to hide. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. I told them I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised anymore. I had spent the last week documenting everything. The money I had contributed to their mortgage, the hours I spent caring for the children, the footage, the equipment receipts, the signatures. I had copies stored safely. And now, I was drawing a line. Jason looked at me, really looked, for the first time in years. Not as someone easy to overlook, not as background, but as someone who had chosen this moment, someone who saw everything. What do you want? He asked. I answered simply. Space. Legal. Physical. Emotional. I want repayment for what I've invested, and I want out. Another silence stretched between us, this one heavier than the rest. Jason nodded slowly. Claire turned and walked back inside without a word. I stood, brushed the dirt from my gloves, and walked past him toward the house. He didn't follow. That night, I began to pack. I folded the things that belonged to me and left theirs untouched. I didn't move in anger. I moved with intention. Every motion was a quiet act of reclaiming. Not from them, but for myself. The morning after our conversation in the garden, I called John. He was an old friend from my years at the school board, someone who understood the quiet language of documentation and due process. I didn't need a courtroom. I needed clarity, and John knew how to write that into being. We didn't talk about feelings. We talked about facts. I told him what I'd seen, what I'd gathered, what I had already mailed to myself and saved elsewhere. He asked questions carefully, never assuming, never rushing. By the end of the call, we had a plan. It was calm, professional, exactly what I needed. The proposal we drafted wasn't dramatic. It was 3 pages long, typed in plain font, and reviewed twice before I printed it. The tone was firm but not threatening. It outlined my financial contributions, specifically the $40,000 I had put toward the down payment on their house 5 years earlier. At the time, Claire had called it a gift. But her thank you email read differently. "Thank you for investing in our future." John had underlined that word, investing. The letter proposed 2 options, either full repayment within a reasonable timeline or conversion of the amount into formal equity and the release of that equity toward relocation. It also included a request for a signed acknowledgement of the breach of privacy and confirmation that all surveillance devices had been permanently disabled and removed. I placed the envelope in Jason's hand one evening as he came in from work. He didn't open it right away, he just held it, turning it once in his fingers, then nodded without saying a word. I didn't follow him. I didn't explain. Claire didn't speak to me for the next 3 days. She moved through the house like a shadow, always a few steps ahead or behind, never in the same room. The camera stayed off. I checked every one. On the 4th day, Jason called me while I was sitting on the porch. He said they had read the letter, that they didn't want this to become something bigger, that they wanted to settle. We met in the dining room the next morning. I wore a navy sweater Michael once said made me look too sharp to be ignored. John joined us on video call. Jason did most of the talking. He said they would repay the full amount through a line of equity, that they'd also include a relocation stipend, that they would sign the acknowledgement letter. Claire sat beside him, silent, her gaze fixed on the table. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply said thank you. That wasn't revenge. It was recognition. For the years I'd given without record, for the silence I'd maintained without consent, for the care that had been expected, never acknowledged, for my worth. When the terms were signed and the copies exchanged, John said it out loud. "That's a clean exit." And for the first time in a long while, I felt like that phrase meant something. Not just legal closure, personal release, a line I had drawn and stood by, a name I had reclaimed, not on paper but in presence. The cottage was smaller than any home I'd ever lived in, but it felt wide open the moment I stepped inside. There were no blinking lights in the corners, no thermostats that adjusted on their own, no soft mechanical hum reminding me I was being monitored. Just creaking floorboards, sunlight through thin curtains, and the gentle hush of stillness that didn't carry judgment. The owner was a widow named Eleanor. She met me on the front porch with a pitcher of lemonade and a smile that didn't feel practiced. We talked for 10 minutes, maybe 20. She handed me the keys like she was giving me something sacred, not just metal on a ring. "I think you'll be happy here," she said. And I believed her. I unpacked slowly. I brought only what I needed. A few sweaters, my favorite books, the photo of Michael and me from our trip to Cape Cod. I folded each item with care, not because anyone was watching, but because no one was. There was no need to be efficient or invisible. Every action was mine alone. By the 3rd day, I found myself moving without caution. I walked barefoot through the kitchen, humming an old tune under my breath. I let cabinet doors close without holding them back. I opened windows without checking the weather app first. The breeze was enough. In the mornings, I sat on the porch with my tea and watched the birds. A blue jay landed on the railing once and stayed there, as if to remind me I wasn't the only one who liked to observe without being observed. I didn't speak. I didn't perform. I just breathed. At night, I slept with the windows cracked open and the blinds pulled halfway. I liked the moonlight. I liked the sound of tree branches moving in the wind. I liked not needing to check the ceiling. The silence here was different. It didn't press or hover. It didn't ask anything of me. It wrapped itself around the house like a soft shawl and left me alone inside it. Not lonely, just whole. I didn't know I had missed this feeling until I felt it again. The freedom to move, to pause, to be without being defined by someone else's lens. This wasn't about starting over. It was about finally arriving. 2 weeks after I moved in, Dylan brought the children to visit. He parked by the curb and stood there for a moment, taking in the ivy-covered fence and the wind chimes dancing softly above the back door. The kids ran ahead of him, barefoot on the grass, laughing in that way only children can, like nothing heavy ever touched them. I didn't stop them. I didn't hush them. I let the sound fill the garden. We sat on the porch while they chased butterflies and climbed the small wooden steps over and over. Dylan looked around slowly, taking in the cottage. He said it felt peaceful. I nodded. It does. It really does. He asked if I needed anything. I told him I didn't. Everything I needed, I had already reclaimed. He stayed quiet for a while, his hands folded in his lap like he was still holding on to some apology he hadn't found the words for. But I didn't need him to say it. I had already let it go. After they left, I sat alone on the porch, watching the late afternoon light stretch long across the fence. I wasn't tired. I wasn't bracing for the next demand, or measuring my presence to avoid becoming a burden. I was simply here. I thought about how different this silence felt. Not the kind I used to endure. Not the kind that watched or waited or withheld. This was the kind of quiet that held you gently. That let you breathe. That didn't ask for anything in return. Inside, the kettle whistled. I stood up slowly, letting the breeze lift the edge of my sleeve. The floor creaked under my feet, and I smiled. No one was going to ask why. No one was going to fix it. It didn't need fixing. I poured my tea and wrote a note to myself on a scrap of paper I kept by the sink. Just one sentence. You are not invisible. I folded it and placed it inside a small jar, one of many now filling with reminders that didn't come from anyone else. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't survival. This was living, and for the first time in a long time, I was free.